That said, I mean, at the age of 53, Jerry was completely spent. He had done everything he possibly could. Yeah, but the drugs had a lot to do with it. He'd been a heroin addict for like 20 years, but as he said, he was never an extreme heroin addict like say Janis. He was a maintenance heroin addict. Little bit of difference, but it did wreak havoc with his health. I mean, he had major diabetes. You know, the funny thing that a lot of people forget about Jerry Garcia is the man technically died in 1986. He flatlined for over a minute in the hospital. And that's when he went in a diabetic coma. He was in the coma, I think, for 3 days or so. The whole floor of the hospital was filled with all his managers, plus the Hells Angels and all the rest. And, he did flatline. His cholesterol was running 900 at that point.
Holy
His feet were average of 10 or 11, and they had swollen to a size 13.
And this is back in the
80s. Pounds.
And this is back in the 80s.
86, yeah.
Wow.
And he miraculously recovered. What's even more miraculous than that is he got back on the road within 4 months. This is a man who, after he came out of a coma, he could hardly speak. He could hardly walk, and he couldn't play guitar. He had to relearn playing the guitar. He would spend a few hours just trying to make an E chord, and within 4 months he was back on the road. Just miraculous.
Wow, I didn't know he had diabetes going back that long. So what was there a specific, what were the drugs that he used the most and abused the most, I should say?
Well, of course, he started out with hallucinogenics, with pot and hallucinogenics, and then they got in. You know, this is the same. It's the same sort of transitions that all of them went through, pretty much. And then they got big into coke throughout the 70s. But coke is almost a professional drug. I mean, rockers almost need it to get through their schedule. You know, some kind of speed. And then they get on the seesaw, right? And then, so ultimately, when it got bad, he got into heroin. They called it Persian at that point. It was a black tar heroin from Persia. And he wasn't a shooter like Janis was. He was always, they called it chasing the dragon. He smoked it. But it was the only thing, as he said, that took him off the pedestal, you know, that made him forget that he was Jerry Garcia. And he wanted badly to forget that. You know, he said, the greatest dream of my life would be if I could just play guitar and get away from all this star nonsense, you know, unlike the others. You know, he said that people asked him, you know, people called him the Buddha or whatever, and people asked him, well, what do you think of all this? You know, the deadheads thinking you're, you know, just the left hand of God. And he said, well, I'll put up with it just until they come at me with the cross and nails, which was, you know.
He came across in interviews. I never got to interview him. I met him backstage, very brief encounter. He seems so mellow, genuinely mellow guy.
Well,
and the interviews you see, he's very talkative and friendly. It's interesting that he wasn't happy with the celebrity part of it. I thought he enjoyed his fans and.
Well, I mean, sure, it's a rush for anybody. He certainly liked to be appreciated, but all this divination thing. I mean, he was actually made into be a god, and he didn't like that at all. Strangely, I mean, there were two schools of thought on this. I mean, you take three people. You take Elvis Presley, you take John Lennon, and you take Michael Jackson. They all had major Jesus complexes. I mean, John went way further than saying, well, the Beatles are bigger than Jesus. I mean, after he was taking acid all the time, and after one of those bouts, he called all the Beatles together. This wasn't too far after Sgt. Pepper's, and he announced to them that he was Jesus Christ, and then he needed to have a press conference to that effect.
And he was completely serious with the guy. It wasn't like a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing with his friends. No, it wasn't.
Of course, he became disabused of that idea later on, but Elvis took it quite seriously. He said that when he went to Graceland, the leaves would tremble with his vibes. He was into healing people very much like Jesus did. Michael Jackson, in his main room, he had a big mural of Isaac Newton, Einstein, Washington, and himself. In his bedroom, he had a picture of the Last Supper, and he was in Christ's place, you know, and these are people who took it pretty seriously, you know, and unlike somebody like Garcia. Also, they said that Cobain didn't like it at all. I mean, that people were saying Cobain's God, and he hated it. I mean, it drove him up a wall.
Yeah, different personality. Wow, the Jesus complex. Okay, we'll talk about that. We have another half hour left with David Comfort, the Rock and Roll Book of the Dead, The Fatal Journeys of Rock 7 Immortals. 866-482-1011 is the number. Any questions about any of them? Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Elvis, Lennon, Cobain, and Garcia. It's good to have you back. In about a half hour, we're going to talk about how to make money on Twitter. Not just, as my guest will say, you're twittering naked if you're not doing something with it. It's a very powerful tool, and what she does is teach these big companies how to get with it. It's kind of a digital divide in this country, so we'll talk to her a little later. Right now, David Comfort, what a fascinating guy. This is a rock and roll historian in his latest book, The Rock and Roll Book of the Dead, The Fatal Journeys of Rock 7 Immortals. 866-482-1011 or twitter.com. And those 7 immortals, Elvis, Janis, Cobain, Hendrix, Morrison, Garcia, and Lennon. 866-482-1011. All right, Dave, great to have you back. Let's go to Mike, line 1. Good to have you on, man.
Hi. Great topic, Alan, once again.
Thanks, Mike.
I was calling wanted to see if you expound on something that was brought up in passing just a bit ago, and that's Jerry Garcia's relationship with the Hells Angels. I just thought that was really interesting, and wondered if you could go into that a little bit more.
Sure.
Yeah, Jerry had... an ambivalent relationship with the Hells Angels. It was pretty great at first because, out the gate, Jerry always said we're a nation of outlaws, and who are the real outlaws? The Hells Angels. So he always felt a real rapport with them, and they did some security for him at some concerts. It turned out really, really well. But then the horror show came at Altamont, and it is said, there are various stories about Altamont that the Stones were in touch with the Grateful Dead about security for Altamont, and Jerry and the others really said, hey, get the Angels, man, and it turned in to be a horror show, of course, really pretty dark. Guy got murdered. I think he became a little indecisive about his commitment to the Angels. That said, I think the Dead were completely disgusted with what happened there. They felt like it wouldn't have resulted in that had the Stones come out when they were supposed to. They waited and waited and waited. Everybody was just strung out waiting for them, and they were waiting for the right light for their film. In the meantime, the Hells Angels were tanked on Reds and beer and stuff, all the complimentary stuff. People were kicking over their bikes, and then it started. And that's going to happen with the Hells Angels. But until then, Jerry saw pretty much the more benign side of the Angels.
Did you want to follow up, Mike, or was that what you wanted to hear?
No, that's great. I just thought it was really interesting that the two of them, the two Grateful Dead, you kind of think of sort of as a peaceful, band, and Flower Childs and all that, and then the Hells Angels, of course, in many ways seem to be sort of the polar opposite. So
well, they were all that they, I think the fans' perception of them, I think, is true. I don't think this takes away from it. It's just behind every act, every band, the same thing can be said for celebrities of any kind. There's a story. There's a backlot story. And it's tough. The business is tough, and all the politics you have to put up with. So I think this doesn't really take away from the image, would you say, Dave? Go ahead, Dave.
Well, it was stupid at Altamont. I don't know who made that decision. I mean, first of all the Hells Angels, they came in their bikes and they parked them around the stage. Now, when people started to press the stage, they don't mean to kick over the bikes, but that happens. It's inevitable. Somebody should have known that. And also, whose bright idea was it to pay them in beer and Reds?
True. Oh, beer and Reds. I didn't know about that. You really did come up with some interesting stuff in this 10 years of research.
And this is an interesting sidelight. I don't know if you guys heard about this. Of course, the Angels were really pissed at Jagger and Richards and the Stones, and they held them responsible for bad-mouthing them and the whole scene that went down. So they put a hit out on Jagger, actually. And the very next year, they tried... Jagger was hanging out on Long Island in one of the mansions or something that he was renting, and they tried to